All right, we are live. The exit philosophy post-game breakdown of the Toronto Blue Jays 2-0 loss to the Minnesota Twins. And you say 2-0. Scotty, what are you talking about? You talking about the final score of today's game, or are you talking about the final score of the series? Talking about both. And Richard Griffin and I are here to break it all down for you. Griff, manager John Schneider has just given his post-game press conference, and you and I took that in, and there's a lot to get to here. I mean, we can do a deep dive into the season that's been, but we got to focus on the decisions that were made in today's game. We will get to Vladimir Guerrero Jr. getting picked off of second base with runners on second and third, 2 outs, and Bo Bichette up. Blue Jays down 2 runs to end the top of the fifth inning. Pretty significant threat, even though there were 2 outs when you consider that Bo was up and had a couple of hits in the ball game already to that point. The decision to replace Jose Barrios, who was more or less shoving after 3+ innings and a leadoff walk in that fourth inning. He had been terrific. And this is a decision that, as I texted you watching John Schneider explain it in the post-game press conference, I said, my opinion, this is my opinion. This is John Schneider coming as close as he possibly can to criticizing a move and a decision that wasn't his.
No, I definitely agree. I mean, just reading between the lines of what he said you can second guess me, you can second guess the organization and the rest of it. But when he includes the organization, usually he takes full credit for decisions within a game. But this one was so ridiculous. I'm sure that Pete Walker, who's an old school baseball man, and John Schneider, who pays attention, obviously, to the analytics handed to him on a daily basis. But you come into this series and you're down 1-0, and you have one of your 4 starters that has been great all year, that you've bragged about as being part of the best rotation in baseball, and he goes 3 innings, and you're trying to trick the opponent. You're trying to trick the Twins by having a guy who is dealing with 47 pitches through 3 innings. His body language is as good as it's been all year. He's ready to keep going. And you got another game tomorrow if you win that game. So bring Kikuchi and save him for tomorrow. Instead, they decide that they're going to show how smart they are. And when I say they, I don't know who made the decision, but we can guess. They have Kikuchi warming up in the first, Kikuchi warming up in the third. He comes into the game after a walk leading off the fourth in a 0-0 game. If you're going to go head-to-head Sonny Gray and Jose Barrios, and Barrios is out dealing him early, why on earth would you change your pitcher at that point? I was saying off air that never in 51 years of being in Major League Baseball and covering Major League Baseball have I ever felt so disassociated from the end result of a game as that game. By the end of the game, when they were down 2-0 and that score stayed the same all the way through, Vlad gets picked off second as a tying run at second with 2 out. Chapman hits into a double play with the bases loaded to get out of an inning. They could have tied the game. Never have I cared less about a game result. I've got friends in that clubhouse. I've got friends all over baseball, but never has it not mattered to me as much as it did after they took Barrios out in that 4th inning.
And you're just referring to the fact that the game stops being human at some point, and we forget that it's played by humans. It's funny, the 162-game marathon is just that, a marathon. Suddenly the playoffs become a sprint. And I don't know exactly when this happened. I tweeted this or X'd it or posted it. I don't know what we're supposed to call our tweets now. In fact, I can't even believe I'm still on that app, but I am. At the time, this was telegraphed, Griff. This was like the bat signal in Gotham, because suddenly the Joker had descended upon us. this was telegraphed on the broadcast that this was coming. Like, it was a fait accompli, regardless of whether Jose Barrios was pitching well or not. And I tweeted at the time, I said, somebody get the guy with the magic binder in this front office who's sat down at this big collaborative meeting that probably involves at least a dozen people, 10 of which you and I haven't heard of. Or maybe you have because you were in the organization a year ago and you've seen those faces who never have to be held to account for all of this crap. And I said in that tweet, I said, look, nobody's going to have to answer for this because it's collaboration, right? And send that master binder guy a tape of the 2016 seventh game of the World Series where Joe Madden almost outmanaged himself into a Cubs loss. They won that game in spite of Joe Madden, not because of Joe Madden. Kyle Hendricks was dealing, but John Lester had been warmed up twice and had to get into the game because he's a starting pitcher, and you can't just keep warming him up at the pen. He's not used to it. So they had to go to him. And that almost cost them. They asked too much of Aroldis Chapman, on and on I could go. This here, I mean, Griff, Jose Barrios was pitching well. Why not have this in your back pocket, have talked about it with Yusei Kikuchi, have even potentially run it by Jose Barrios if you feel the need to, so that you have them prepared for the possibility of this. But why be so inflexible when Barrios comes out shoving like he was?
Well, you and I talked about it on Monday's exit philosophy, that the having Kikuchi as a weapon was a great asset for the Blue Jays, because if anybody struggled early, he could come in and make them pinch hit. But that scenario involves somebody struggling, not somebody just shoving it for 3 full innings and looking confident and keeping his pitch count down to 47. And now, because you've discussed this behind closed doors in the coach's room with the front office people, you have to do it. Like, John Schneider's in the dugout. Maybe he can just go against the flow and say, Jose, you're still in there. You're going back out for the 4th. We've changed plans. You're going to deal until you can't deal anymore. I mean, if he gives up 2 or 3 runs on his own, then you still have time to bring Kikuchi in, and you're still in the same position. But the other thing is, are they trying to show how smart they are by having Kikuchi go in for 5 outs? I mean, they could have had Genesis Cabrera go in for 3 outs and have the same effect in terms of turning people around. And by the time Romano came in to face the new right-handed hitters, he got Solano out. And then there was a base hit by Castro. So, and it was the 8th inning, and who cares at that point? But it just seems like it was front office trying to prove how smart they were instead of going head to head and trying to beat the opponent. Like, as soon as Barrios came out of that game, the Twins dugout says, we got this. The Twins dugout says, they're scared of us. We're a better team, and they don't want to face us man-to-man straight up. We've got this, and they did.
Games have flows. And the Blue Jays completely ignored the flow of this game. The Galaxy brain, look, I'm all for planning. You can't walk into the dugout as a manager or as a coach in your underwear. I mean, you need to be dressed. You need to be prepared. I'm not talking about that. You need to plan for eventualities. You need to project possibilities. But you do not – this is not professional wrestling. This is not Macho Man Randy Savage and Ricky the Dragon Steamboat at WrestleMania 3, where Randy Savage insisted to Ricky Steamboat, we are going to choreograph this entire match from first move to finishing move, everything in between, because we're dancing together here. You're playing an opponent. You cannot guarantee that you are going to be in a position in the 6th, 7th, or 8th innings for the moves that you're making in the 4th, which are completely dependent in terms of them looking good on you having the lead in the 7th or 8th innings. You can't assure yourself of that. And once the Twins had the 2-0 lead, raise your hand if you're put your hand up in the comments. We'll get to some of your comments and answer some of your questions. Thank you so much for joining us. This is the first ever live youtube.com/Exit Philosophy, Exit Philosophy live chat. And Griff and I are going to do more of these as time goes on and into next year. But raise your hand if at 2-0 Twins you thought this team was coming back. And that's not to say there weren't plenty of opportunities. We saw that. But goodness, man, it's like they scripted this, Griff, just assuming, okay, the only thing they didn't fill in was the score. So it's going to be scoreless in the 4th when we remove Jose Barrios. Now, Matt Chapman gets X amount of loft and X amount of pull against Sonny Gray, and so his 5th inning double will go into the left center field gap, and so will cash him in. And then we'll have a 1-0 lead, and then it'll just all work out. We're not rolling dice. We're not hitting enter on a computer keyboard. Humans are playing this game.
Let's go to some comments if you can pull them up. But here's a catch-22 for you, Scotty. The good news is that they can start construction on the new lower level behind the plate stadium. The bad news, the catch-22, is that who's going to buy it after that debacle?
Well, here's the thing, Griff. It's a good line. I like it a lot. And I know you're being facetious and asking half-assedly that question, but the truth of the matter is that there are very few people who can afford the prices of those lower box seats, and the ones who can aren't necessarily going to sit down and take in a full 9-inning baseball game, right? They're going for the vibe and
none of our friends, none of my friends anyway. I don't know about
Exit Philosophy. Oh, by the way, if you want a pal to take to a game, I'm down to sit in those seats. How's this going to play out over the next couple of days, Griff? Because I was on X, so strike one against me. I feel like the Family Feud now. We talk about X. Man, there should be an X for admitting that you were on X, like I just admitted. Everybody wanted to put the bullet in John Schneider's temple. And I get it, okay? Somebody needs to be the uniform-wearing, front-facing piñata for this. But the problem, and I have a bunch of problems with the Toronto Blue Jays front office, and if you'll just get off my lawn, I'll scream at the clouds about it. But here's the thing with a collaborative decision like that. It allows for buck passing and allows for ass covering, and nobody actually has to tell us who insisted upon this decision being made, because I don't think John Schneider made the decision. And you know what I also don't think is going to happen? Because his human shield named Ross Atkins is going to be the one doing the season-ending press conference in 2 or 3 days, and you won't see the guy who actually runs the baseball operations department, Mark Shapiro, until he wants to take you on a tour of his splashy new lower level. He's the one who needs to sit down and face the music and answer the questions for a team that was supposed to win the American League East and was supposed to win 90 or more games at least, and they couldn't even do that in 164, and then they go completely galaxy brain in an elimination game in the playoffs. The sport is different, but it's not that different from regular season to postseason. But these guys are always trying. It's like when Chad Green needed to enter the game in the middle of an inning in Buffalo before we can bring him back, when it was really just we're waiting till September 1st when the rosters expand to call Chad Green up so that we don't have to send somebody else down. But he had to check the box of entering the game in the middle of an inning. Why is everything so nuanced and super science-y? These guys are insufferable.
I'm looking forward to, and you've said 2 or 3 days. It'll probably be later in the week, next week, where Ross Atkins meets the media. I'll be interested in that. Maybe we can have another one of these after that session, because I'm sure that they'll have a week to put a spin on this, but it's impossible because, like,
Indefensible.
Take me, for example, 162 games of the regular season. I've been playing along like a manager, because I've managed youth baseball and up to 19 to 22 for the last 20 years. And so I've been managing along, and sometimes I don't get it, but I cut some slack because, there's some analytic information that I'm not privy to. But the basics of baseball haven't changed. And the way that this Blue Jays team butchered the basic elements of playing baseball is indefensible. Analytics has nothing to do with it. So you mix that inability to pay attention to detail, as you've pointed out on Exit Philosophy, was a promise at spring training and a reason that Charlie Montoyo was let go, because you wanted to bring someone in who paid attention to details. Well, where are the details when Vladdy's fist pumping Bo at the plate and telling him, get a hit, I'm on second, and I'm the tying run, full count, let's go, Bo. And then he spins, Sonny Gray spins, Correa cuts in behind him, he's flat-footed, and he throws him out, and the inning's over. I mean, where's the attention to detail there? I can't defend this anymore, and I'm not sure who it is, the players, the manager, the coaches, or the front office, and we'll find out. I'll have a better idea after the session with Ross Atkins later next week.
They've been here for 8 years, Griff. They've been here for 8 years, and everybody's, and I want to be very clear about this. And I'm bringing his name up only because his name always comes up when I try to have a conversation with somebody who wants to defend this front office. Well, you just love Alex Anthopoulos. Dude, I gotta tell you, a lot's happened in my life since 2015. I'm over that. Like a long time ago. Stephen Harper was still the Prime Minister of Canada, and Donald Trump hadn't been elected President of the United States yet when Alex Anthopoulos was leaving the building. We're past the point now where we need to compare this front office to anybody. They did get playoff game victories in their first season here in 2016, but they started to construct their team, and it started with a teardown, and nobody argued that because of the age of a lot of the star players. That's not what's in focus here, but they started their teardown in 2017. So this is year 7 of this group looking like and actually being their group. They have 0 playoff game victories to show for this, and most presidents and most general managers with that record over that long a period of time would be Gone, gone. And quite frankly, Ricciardi, who you dealt with when you were at the Toronto Star, he kind of had an aura about him that he was coming to Canada to teach us all about baseball. This corporate America, Wall Street cardboard cutout, I talk in really fancy words that get board members all excited under the table. Crap needs to stop. These guys aren't relatable, and they aren't having enough success on the field to justify this without major change. They either need to change some of their philosophies, go about this differently, or they need to get gone.
In 2017, when they started their rebuild, they pointed to 2021 as a time, and I could see it progressing more quickly. And when I was at the Star writing columns, I suggested that 2020 might actually be the year where they compete. And the pandemic hit in 2020, and they made it to the wild card round in a 60-game season. So that didn't really tell you anything. And this last year's team may be the best team they had. They maybe they overthink things, like when they got rid of the jacket and when they got rid of Teoscar and when they got rid of Lourdes and when they threw Gabby Moreno into a deal to get a guy that they said could be a catcher. He caught 30 games. Dalton Varsho caught 30 games in Arizona, and that was touted when they made the acquisition. They said this guy can not only play great outfield, but he can catch, and there hasn't been any of that. So one of the assets that you were touting has never been used. The offense went tremendously downhill. The rotation they built as solid and reliable and durable as any in baseball. And yet here they come to the final game of the 2023 season, and they don't even trust to leave one of the guys they reached out for and put in this tremendous 5-man rotation, and a bullpen that they say is as deep as any, and they bring Kikuchi in the fourth because they want to show how smart they are. They want to show that we're so deep, we don't even need to go to the bullpen right away, but we can make Rocco Baldelli change his left-handed hitters to right-handed hitters, and then we'll have the advantage when Romano comes in the ninth. Well, Romano came in the seventh because they were still down 2-0. But let's go look at some observations from outside. You're in charge here, so you get us going on it.
So we've got a bunch of people who are in the chat with some repeated comments. So I'll just start scrolling here. I've got to go back up now. A YouTube user says Schneider fully should have been able to think for himself in that moment. Just brutal. I mean, I think what
let's use a name on the which YouTube user was that?
Yeah, K with the circle there, a little bit further up. And I think what K is saying is he should have been able to, not that we expect him to, because I can tell you right now, if John Schneider crosses the bosses and goes rogue in the dugout, and then Barrios gets dunked on for 2 or 3 runs, how's that going to go?
Yeah, I mean, once that game started and the agreement was in place with the front office and Pete Walker and John Schneider, then there was no turning back at that point. And you could see it when Kikuchi went out in the first inning to warm up. And as a starting pitcher, he needs to go through his routines because he had made 30-plus starts for the regular season. And you don't just convert to a short reliever and do all the things that the bullpen guys do. So you could see in the first and third inning that he was coming into the game. He was heating up, but he was heating up at a starter's pace. And like once that game started and they were in that pattern and had that plan, there was no turning back for Schneider. He couldn't sort of stand up and say, this guy's dealing, I'm going to leave him in. You can't do that at that point.
Steve Burney, why does everyone keep talking about Kikuchi coming in? The Jays scored 0 runs. Even if Barrios went 7, Kikuchi or another reliever would have come in at some point.
Well, that's exactly the point, is that it was only a 2-0 game. The 2 runs scored before Kikuchi was able to get out of that 4th inning, which makes it stand out. But I still would have criticized the move, even if he had got out of that inning.
I just, it's impossible to prove quantities in sort of existential and philosophical opinions. But this team kind of played to the way that the front office set this up. This isn't sort of a free-flowing, come as you are. You got to be prepared. You got to have an idea, if you're a hitter, of how pitchers are going to attack you. You got to know where to stand in the field at your position. Everybody's got a card in their back pocket now when a particular hitter comes up, his tendencies. I'm not talking about that. I'm just saying that this game was scheduled and almost predetermined in how it was going to play out. And these guys play like they're just overloaded with information. like they're paralyzed at times, like they're not necessarily 100% focused and locked in on what's going on. I mean, the Vladdy thing was hideous at second base, Griff. You know, we're talking a lot Barrios Kikuchi. We should. I know you touched on Vlad briefly. It's a whole other topic that we got to get to. I mean, that just can't happen. And it can't happen at any time with anyone. We'd be ragging on the 26th man on the roster if he was a pitcher. That was Cam Eden, whose sole purpose was to run the bases one time for this team each game. We'd be ragging on him. Vladimir Guerrero Jr. is supposed to be a leader on this team. He's one of this team's best players.
Well, he was fist pumping for Bo. He's saying, "Come on, Bo, get a hit," and Correa was sneaking in behind him while he was doing that, and he was flat-footed. So that's a form of leadership. I had one observation, Scotty, that I had been meaning even on the last episode that we did on Monday about hitters and why this team is not ready in the first inning and why it's been 13 first innings in a row that they haven't got a run. And from observing for 4 years in that clubhouse as a member of the Blue Jays front office, and then this year, they spend so much time, and we can count down the number of hitting coaches that they have, or the number of hitting consultants, or the number of guys that they have waiting for them in the cages to use the fast pitch machines. But they spend so much time looking at video of the pitcher that they're about to face and how he approached him the last time. First of all, pitchers make adjustments. Like if he approached you that way last time, it doesn't mean that Sonny Gray is going to approach you the same way this time. And we've seen it a lot where we talk to the manager and he goes, well, we're expecting them to attack us with fastballs. And then the guy goes out and he throws nothing but breaking balls for the first 3 innings. And it discombobulates the Blue Jays hitters because they've been studying so much video from history. I mean, if you don't learn from history, you're destined to repeat it. And they face pitchers who have made adjustments, and they don't make those adjustments for some reason. Maybe they just haven't been taught to. But that's my theory on why they start games slowly, because the first time through the order, they got to see the way that the guy is approaching them this time, not last time, this time.
So what happens here? Like Guillermo Martinez gets the axe and everybody's supposed to be satisfied, because there will be changes, Griff. They cannot proceed status quo. And but I wonder, because these guys are so obtuse and so myopic, if they think that chopping off the hitting coach's head is just going to satiate.
Well, we all know that in that clubhouse, they have Guillermo Martinez, they got Dave Hudgens, they got Don Mattingly.
And 8 people you haven't heard of.
Yeah, they got people waiting at the cage to feed the machine and give them tips. But it's not one guy. It's not Guillermo Martinez. These guys find someone who works well with them in terms of giving them tips, giving them advice, watching them during games, and they go to them. They don't necessarily ignore Don Mattingly and go to Guillermo because Guillermo is the head hitting coach. They find someone who can help them. So, like, pointing a finger at one guy just is not the solution. Like, changing the hitting coach isn't going to change the result with this group. They're going to have to do some, I don't know. They're going to have to get some new, like, to me, Matt Chapman has no chance of returning next season as a free agent, as a Scott Boras free agent, where he's going to expect 5 years for, I don't know, $18-20 million a year. That's not going to happen.
No, that's not going to happen, because he was one of the worst hitters in baseball from May onward. And the defense is still very good, but it's not elite anymore. And he's, on the other side of 30 now. Let somebody else pay him. He's an interchangeable part here, Griff. People are saying, I think the fan base is enraged. So the Blue Jays need to clean house. That's from New Brunswick, Canada guy. Shout out to the Maritimers who are in our feed.
Here's one, Jason
East
Chung.
Coast lifestyle.
Jason Chung, I feel bad for Barrios. He was robbed of his moment, which is exactly right. I mean, everything was there for him to have a moment that he remembers for the rest of his life. Going back to Minneapolis, where he'd cut his teeth as a major league player, pitching maybe his best first 3 innings of the season. His body language was all there. And like, it was a chance. If they had won that game, they could have still used Kikuchi and the rest of those guys tomorrow and used that plan. They had to win 2 games, and this was only the second game. This was a tying game with a guy who was dealing, with a guy whose moment was there, who was family and friends in the stands. And like, he was robbed of that moment because analytics said that we can trick the Twins into turning all their hitters around to the right side. And like, why is it not the same thing when a left-hander faces a bunch of right-handed hitters? Why don't they go, oh, well, you know, there's a bias against right-handers facing left-handers, and Barrios was a victim of that today.
So, I mean, Griff, I know I might be asking you something that's a little out of your depth, but if somebody is joining us who doesn't know Griff's history in the game, you know, you were with Montreal Expos for more than 20 years in their media relations department. And in 1995, you moved your family to Toronto and you became the lead baseball columnist for the Toronto Star. And you did that job for more than 2 decades. And to the end of the 2022 season, you spent 4 years running the Toronto Blue Jays media relations department. So 2019, 2020, 21, 22. I'm not saying you're in these sorts of meetings where decisions about approach, etc., are being made. But is it your view, because all we ever hear about is process?
Yes, process. That's a key word.
Corporate buzzword number 1. Collaboration.
That's number 2. That's the keyword number 2.
There's somewhere in there is culture, and somewhere in there is values, and somewhere is making a mess in your diaper. Is there anybody, because it's culture of collaboration, right? We're all collaborating here. We're sitting around a table. We're strategizing. Is there anybody, given the people who run this team at the top, is there anybody who would have the confidence within the confines of a closed-door private meeting involving a half dozen, 8, 10 strategists who could look at the general manager or the president and CEO, who you damn well know is involved in baseball operations, despite the fact he never speaks to them, who could say, guys, we gotta put away the crack pipe. We've got to not approach a playoff baseball game like this. We need to have potentialities. We need to have possibilities. We need to have options. We need to have variables. We need to have all of these things. We need to be prepared, but we actually can't go forth with a script that is going to look asinine, stupid, and ridiculous. Our starting pitcher, for example, is looking lights out. Is there anybody who could actually say that, maybe a little more politely than I did, and not feel like the weight of the world was going to push back on them and that they'd be worried about their job tomorrow?
Bruce Bochy and Buck Showalter.
Exactly why. You know, I don't know. I don't know if Bochy ever would have come to Toronto.
But I am certain that the coaching staff who listened to this plan for Game 2 of the wild card series, even down 1-0 in the wild card series, I'm sure there were coaches in that room who didn't agree with that scenario, who didn't agree that Jose Barrios was going to be our 3-inning starter, and then we'll bring in Kikuchi.
But I'm asking you if they would feel that they could speak up and say that.
They may. My guess is that there was a dissenting voice or two, but the voices that make the ultimate decision, because collaboration involves listening to people and then making your decision anyway. So I think that that's the case. And I can't see Pete Walker, who loves his pitchers like they're his sons, would have gone along without an objection of some kind.
Yeah. Vladdy getting picked off second base, another crucial moment in this game. You know, look at the box scores. Game 1, Toronto 1 run on 6 hits. Game 2, Toronto no runs on 9 hits.
Yeah, and an earlier comment makes that point. Is like, how are you blaming the whole series loss on that?
But here's what's funny. Here's what's funny, and when I say this, I understand it's not always true. But if the larger sample size of 162 games didn't just extend itself to games 163 and 164 this time around, couldn't hit with runners in scoring position, couldn't run the bases, couldn't pay enough attention to detail. And by the way, if those attention to detail phrases that were, emerging from Dunedin on a daily basis for 4 weeks were in any way, and I don't know if they were, but were in any way clandestine shots at Charlie Montoyo, I wouldn't repeat that phrase next spring, because we found out he ain't the problem.
I think for my funeral on my tombstone, I'm going to just put it's still early. That seemed to be the comment on Vlad and Bo and others who had slow starts, and 162 games later were having slow finishes. And Vlad, God bless Vlad, 264, 26 home runs, 94 RBIs. It's a legitimate season for a 24-year-old, but not coming off the 21 season where he established himself as a budding superstar in the game. And what's happened? There's one question here. Jeff Peters, what are the odds Vladdy is a Blue Jay in 2024? What do you think you could get, Scotty, as a package in a trade for 2 years plus potential free agency of Vlad?
Oh my God. Are we doing this?
Yeah, do it.
Are we going to do this? Okay. Well, I mean, I'm happy to do it.
Yeah,
I'm happy to do it.
It's not going to happen, I don't think. But
okay, because I thought you were going to ask me, like, out of 10, 0 being not at all, 10 being absolutely happening, the likelihood of this, and I would say only because never say never, like 0.1, like 0.1, like maybe you get blown away with an offer you can't refuse. I'm just telling you, I'll take a different tact on it. The possibility and the potential of Vlad is still very much there, number one. Number two, if Vladimir Guerrero Jr. got traded and went on to hit 40-plus home runs and have an OPS or WRC plus of like 180 next season, which those are nerd stats.
Yeah.
And the baseline for OPS plus and WRC plus, weighted runs created plus, is always 100. The mathematical equation and how they dock it, 100 is always the league average for a player. So what I'm saying by like a 180 OPS or WRC plus is that Vladdy is 80% better than an average player that year in Major League Baseball. If he is so elite next year like he was in 2021 playing for another team, you don't survive that if you're this front office. So there's no way he's going anywhere. It might be a legitimate conversation a year from now if we're in a somewhat similar spot, because then you're only 1 year away from Vladdy's free agency.
Yeah.
If they haven't signed him. And I don't think they're going to, because I think he wants way more money than he's worth right now, and they would be stupid to just back a wheelbarrow up with $350 million in it.
Yeah, I think in terms of Vlad that he would be silly to sign a long-term deal right now. He would be better doing it near the end or after next season if he has a representative year of a superstar. I think Bo might be the guy that gets the first shot at the multi-millions from the Blue Jays. But I think that Bo and Vlad I still think that they're the future of this organization for the next 7-8 years.
Northern Christine, wherever you are in, I'm assuming Northern Ontario or Northern Canada or Maybe it's just a nickname. Two of the best executives in MLB are Alex Anthopoulos in Atlanta and Farhan Zaidi in San Francisco, both Canadian, and we get the idiots from Cleveland. Well, I will say this to that, Christine. As a subscriber of The Athletic, who is just to the other side of an insane fan of the San Francisco 49ers, I do get a lot of Bay Area material in my Athletic subscription. And I do have a tendency to go over to the San Francisco Chronicle and read the sports page because the 49ers are obviously a big part of that at this time of year. Farhan Zaidi is under fire right now in San Francisco. So you make a good point and a proud Canadian success story, but it isn't always smooth, even for those born on our side of the border. So it comes and it goes. But I understand your frustration with Mark Shapiro and Ross Atkins. There's no doubt about that. And I will remind everybody who's watching right now, they didn't arrive yesterday. They have been here 8 years. And Griff, let's do the list. Who have they drafted and developed? Who have they signed internationally and developed who are consequential pieces? Almost a decade into their tenure, where there's run on this now. We're not criticizing them after 2 years. They've drafted and developed Bo Bichette. They've drafted and developed Danny Jansen, Alejandro Kirk, Alek Manoah, although we're not clear on where that's headed, but it looked pretty good for a time. After that, Jordan Romano, okay. Jordan Romano, except that he was lost in the Rule 5 draft. He was so unvalued at the time. And they were fortunate that they got him back because as per the rules of the Rule 5 draft, if the team that claims you doesn't keep you on their major league roster for the subsequent season in its entirety, they offer you back to your original team. And that's what happened. So yes, Jordan Romano developed in this system, but he was almost lost to another team. I don't see enough run here of people who are drafted and developed or signed internationally and developed for a front office that apparently prioritizes that because, my goodness, did Mark Shapiro lecture Alex Anthopoulos behind closed doors about how to do a better job when he arrived in Toronto in the middle of the 2015 season. I don't see enough examples of all of this brilliance that we keep being told is just everywhere in the ether with these guys.
Well, let's look ahead to what they might do next year. I mean, their pitching rotation is solid. The bullpen is deep. And then I think it looks like they've been grooming Ricky Tiedemann to be up in the major leagues at some point. There's a guy that they drafted. They drafted him high. It was a good draft pick so far, or it looks like. And so they can spend all their money on rebuilding their offense, rebuilding their lineup. I wouldn't be surprised if they re-signed Kevin Kiermaier for a one-year deal again, maybe two, and then use him as a fourth outfielder most of the time in center field. But like the pitching staff right now is taken care of in terms of what they need to do to build for next year, so they can focus on the hitting. But to your point of who have they drafted and signed, and especially in the international market, that's a very great question. But it's something that is worth paying attention to. But I wouldn't write off what they've done. I mean, I've seen drafts over the years with some of the best GMs in baseball, and you look back at their individual years draft picks, and there's so many that don't make it, that are just disappear into the ether, that I don't think you can go by the draft. If you get one major league player, two major league players average out of every draft, then I think you're doing well.
Okay, and that's fair, but I'm talking about the adherence to prospects, and you can't trade all of your prospects, and you can't empty the cupboard, and this and that. And So if that's your philosophy, I just would expect that there would be more who would be contributing on a regular basis at a higher level 8 years into your run with this franchise. Griff, I'm telling you, I'm hung up on the 8-year thing because are we at a point now where only Pat Gillick is a longer serving Blue Jays general manager than Ross Atkins? How long was Ricciardi here? He arrived in 02.
02 and then
after 09?
Yes. So
No,
that's
he
8
was
years.
gone after 09?
Yeah, that's 8 years.
Right. Okay, so they're tied with Ricciardi.
Yeah.
They're tied with Ricciardi now. I mean, at some point, fruit needs to be born.
That's pretty amazing, actually, when you think about it, that they have been here that long,
Yeah. I mean, I just let me raise my hand and say I am grateful to have been graced with the presence for as long as they have tolerated people like me observing their work. But that's just it, Griff. It's at some point, and I was having a conversation. I guested on a podcast in Ottawa yesterday. Shout out to my buddy Matt Robinson, Tall Can Audio. He talks a lot of beer on his podcast, Griff. We should do this podcast together at some point down the road. He said to me, I've never really been a big soccer fan, but I'm kind of coming around to the way that a lot of the European leagues sort of prioritize regular season success. And then they go off and they have Champions League and separate tournaments for the elite teams. How can you judge, the lack of playoff success so far juxtaposed with the sort of consistent regular season success over 500 every year, blah, 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 that this Blue Jays franchise has enjoyed in recent years? And I said a couple of things to that. And this is not Mark Shapiro's or Ross Atkins' fault, but they are the beneficiary, like every other general manager in baseball and front office in baseball, but they are the beneficiary of an expanded playoff format, right? So there's that.
Yeah, but it's still fewer teams making the playoffs than NBA and NHL. So I forgive them. And we've talked about it on Exit Philosophy about how good it is for markets all over North America, all over MLB to still be in it in September, and how it makes September baseball much better. Right.
And I'm pro expanded playoffs, even though you run the risk of a crappy team getting hot and winning the World Series. That's life. I also said they are the beneficiaries of the fact that the ownership group of this baseball team, which I believe has owned the Blue Jays since 2000 or 2001, somewhere in there, really has shown a willingness to open up its financial coffers for the first time to properly compete with the Yankees and the Red Soxes of the world over the last half decade or so. And if Mark Shapiro deserves credit for greasing those wheels with Edward Rogers or other members of the board, then full credit to him for doing so. But there was a long time here where the Toronto Blue Jays didn't have the proper payroll to compete. They do now. And so because they're behaving like a big market team, it is within the fans' rights to expect big market results at this time of year.
I remember at the winter meetings in Las Vegas when I was writing for the Star, and Paul Beeston had just come back as president from Major League Baseball, and his philosophy was, we will spend money on payroll when the fans come to the ballpark and support. And I shook my head. I said, "Are you kidding me? That's backwards. This is professional sports. You got to spend money to get fans to come to the ballpark. You can't just say, come to the ballpark and then we'll spend money. That's not the way it works." And to this group's credit, to Mark Shapiro's credit, since he didn't have money to spend in Cleveland, he has made it an imperative part of his job to go to Rogers and ask for the payroll that he needs to compete. And that was part of him being lured to Toronto by Rogers, was that he would have the ability to walk in there at any time and say, "Hey, okay, we need more money to sign to trade for Matt Chapman, to sign Chris Bassett, that sort of thing. I have one question for you though, Scotty. I was thinking that the end of season loss to the Mariners last year might be the worst loss that this club had ever seen. How would you compare that to this year's loss?
Last year's was heartbreaking. This year's was more like the pallbearers have been carrying the casket for 3 months and have just been wondering when they get to drop it in the ground. And turns out that October the 4th is the date. You and I, Griff, we made our predictions. And shout out to you, by the way, because you called the Rangers. I took the Rays because I thought the Rays were going to do all right in the back half of ball games, but it turns out they got their asses handed to them in the first half of both ball games and never had a chance to pick at that Rangers bullpen. You took the Jays in this series. I took the Twins, wanting very badly to be wrong, but I took the Twins because I expected it was more likely that we'd see what we saw, not the Barrios Kikuchi thing, but the offense and its inability to come through in big moments and base running gaffes. I expected we would see more of this team just continue on. And also Minnesota, who we don't see a lot, is better than just, they won a bad division. They've got pretty good pitching, both starting rotation depth and in the back end of their bullpen. So yeah. I find last year's loss, the way that it happened, to be crushing. I find this sort of as the final dot on the ... of the ongoing I can't get behind this crap anyway.
I mean, the Jays pitching staff did only allow 5 runs in 2 games against the Twins, so their offense isn't that overpowering. And the rookie that had been hurt came back and hit 2 home runs, drove in 3 in the first game. So the Blue Jays pitching did their part, but the offense was. And my theory on the Rays and the Blue Jays is that maybe the AL East is a division of marathoners, and the sprinters are all in the Central and the West, because how else do you explain the Rays winning 99, the Jays winning 89? So maybe Baltimore is next to fall against the Rangers in a 5-game series. I mean, that's a possibility, that these teams focus so much on fighting each other, these AL East teams, and fighting each other for division and wild card spots over 162 games, that they're not built for the sprint.
Fair point. The other part of it is you got the Seager, Semien, middle of the diamond, and
I'd begin my sprint with those 2 guys, 1-2 in the batting order. I mean,
right? And Griff, best laid plans, right? We're focusing a lot on the front office. They do put the team together, but it is what happens on the field. I don't think Mark Shapiro and Ross Atkins entered into their calculations that Vladimir Guerrero was going to be, by his standard, pedestrian this year. And I know that he's 24 years old, and I know that he's younger than guys like Davis Schneider, even though he's got 4.5 more years of MLB experience. But he is that young. Like it's easy to forget that because of how long he's been around. But I would just say that despite his youth, it's advantageous for him to have broken into the league so young, because it means his big payday is coming when he is younger and still physically in his prime. Like, it's not like he's waiting till he's 30 to become a free agent and cash in. He's going to hit that mark at 26. He's playing for big money as a very young player. He's still going to be very young next year. There are a lot of guys in double and triple A who are 24, 25 years old about to make that breakthrough. Vladdy's closing in on a monster payday. Like, I think it's reasonable, given his level of experience at the big league level, to expect more than what we saw from him this year.
Yeah, we've talked about it on Exit Philosophy. I think that there's more and more talented young players who are being who are sort of held up as beacons for other young players who are still amateur. And the way to do that is to get them to the major leagues sooner. So if you're going to put up with mistakes by a 29-year-old, you might as well put up with mistakes by a 20-year-old. And so you get them to the majors, you compete with other sports, you compete with football, you compete with basketball. And because they hated looking, those kids who were great athletes hated looking at baseball and going, it's going to take me 5 years riding buses to make it to the major leagues and then 3 more years to reach arbitration and get any kind of good money. No thanks. I'm going to go be a wide receiver in the NFL. And like the only way to combat that is to make it so that they get to the major leagues after 1 year, 2 years in the minor leagues. And we're seeing more and more of it. And I think that is one way, but it means that we can't be perfectionists in what we expect to see on the field. We're going to see a lot of mistakes. The only thing is the mistakes are being made on this team, on this Jays team, by guys that shouldn't be making mistakes because they've been around long enough. I have one question or comment that I think is specifically directed at you, Scotty. It's from Mike Felker. It says, hating on X users is the new hating on Nickelback fans. What do you think about that?
I'm only hating on myself, man. I'm using X.
Self-flagellation.
I'll be dead before I buy a blue check mark, but I am still using X.
Yeah, me too. I don't hate the vehicle. I hate the passengers. Some of them.
Yeah, the passengers. If we're using X, shouldn't we be drinking X too? It's a good
call.
Little love for Quebec, huh? Molson,
Yeah.
Hex Sport.
I got a vodka iced tea here. That's neither here nor X, but
Crack it open.
I did already.
Okay, good.
While John Schneider was giving his presser.
Probably wishing he could have one too. Northern Christine asks again, in the early 90s, didn't the Jays have the highest payroll? Does Griff remember? The answer to that question is yes, they did. And you were around for it, Griff, but I continue to believe more than a quarter century later that the worst thing that ever happened for the Toronto Blue Jays was Labatt, its primary owner, being purchased by a Belgian brewing company at the time known as Interbrew. It's changed to IntBev and may even have another name now. But when Labatt was bought by Interbrew, it became essentially Belgian owned. And, pardon me for being ignorant, but I'm going to place good money on the unlikelihood of the Blue Jays being a non-factor in most people's minds in Brussels.
Yeah, good call right there. But I think that the greatest thing that led to the 92-93 highest payroll is that Pat Gillick and Paul Beeston treated it like they owned the team and they went out and spent money. They just reported in and said, we spent this, we spent that. And the dollar amounts weren't anywhere close to what they are today. But when Interbrew came in, Gord Ash sort of tried to do the same thing, but Gord Ash wasn't the same general manager as Pat Gillick. So a lot of his spending was like Mike Sorotka, who came over with a bad shoulder, and they spent money in the wrong places in many cases. And but that ownership was a dark, dismal period. And that's when I started covering the Jays is during the Interbrew ownership, and was not the best baseball in the world.
Brian L says, keep in mind, Pat Gillick was a genius and one of the greats. He didn't have the same difficulties of players coming to Canada that GMs have had in the past 20 years. Defense was their strategy. I'll say this about Pat Gillick. Won in Toronto, leaves for Baltimore, turns that ship around, leaves for Seattle, and builds a 116-win regular season team managed by Lou Piniella in 2001. That was just post Ken Griffey Jr. and A-Rod and the introduction of Ichiro, and then goes to Philadelphia and turns that ship around and wins a World Series. Like, everywhere Pat Gillick went, whether it was building the Blue Jays more or less from scratch because he came in so early, and everywhere he went afterward went from unsuccessful to successful, Griff, almost immediately.
There are just two things about Pat Gillick, and I love the guy. I mean, he's a Hall of Famer, and he's a great guy to deal with and talk with. But there's two things. One was, for some reason, whenever he moved on to another team, he kept his home with his wife in the previous city. So when he moved to Baltimore, he's lived in Toronto. And then when he moved to Seattle, he lived in Baltimore. And then when he moved to Philadelphia, he lived in Seattle. So I don't know what that's from, except that his wife ran art galleries, I think, or something like that. So maybe she established businesses and they just stayed behind. And the other is, when he went from the Blue Jays to Baltimore, I knew him from, with the Expos. And then when I came over, he asked me, what do you think of Kevin Malone? Because Pat was going to Baltimore. I said, well, Kevin's okay. He likes the media. He likes to talk a lot. And Pat goes, perfect, because that's why I want to hire an assistant GM who can do TV and radio, because I hate it. so he hired Kevin Malone as his assistant. Kevin Malone ended up going to the Dodgers and screwing up that organization. But yeah, God bless Pat.
Got a job because he could talk.
Oh, yeah.
God, who was owning the Dodgers at that time? Was that McCourt?
Yeah, I believe so. Yeah.
But if it was McCourt, then you can't lay that whole thing on Malone.
Kevin Malone, when he got there, said, there's a new sheriff in town, and he signed Kevin Brown to some ridiculous contract.
Kevin Brown was the first $100+ million pitcher.
Yeah. And how'd that work out? Not very well.
It didn't, because Brown was really good with the Padres. Wasn't he the ace of that 98 World Series team that lost to the Yankees? And then he went to LA, but that was also during an era, Griff, where players seemed to break apart really quickly after their primes.
Yeah,
for reasons that might not be un-Balco related.
But just from the mellow atmosphere that we're creating right now, I think we've talked ourselves down off the ledge of the Game 2 wildcard series debacle by the Blue Jays tonight.
I think it helps, Griff. I think it helps. This game was run so bizarrely, and we covered that earlier on. So sorry that the temperature has been turned down as this chat has gone on. But we're seeing it in some of the comments too. What happened there? We were both buffering for a second.
Yeah,
that's.
I think they're telling us to wrap it up.
Yeah. Are we going to get outed for having some free stream that we've just pirated from the middle of nowhere? and we're going to hit a 75-minute cutoff mark or something at some point. But my point is, Griff, is I think a lot of people were just kind of all right, so there's no game tomorrow.
Yeah.
I'm fully emotionally detached and exhausted by the last 6 months. And it was only 3 or 4 weeks ago they were getting swept by Texas at home and getting booed out of their own building. And then they sweep Boston at home that following weekend. Well, Texas goes to Cleveland and gets swept. And the two teams flipped right back in terms of playoff positioning. It was just so weird and up and down, and you couldn't get close to this group.
I think the mellowness that I'm feeling right now is just knowing from watching 162 games of these guys and then 2 games in Minneapolis is that they weren't going much further. This team was not the way that they were playing, the way that they weren't responding just because of the adrenaline rush of the postseason. It didn't seem to help the offense. Their pitching was the same all season, so that wasn't going to carry them through another round. So maybe it was just the realization that this team just wasn't good enough.
Yeah, I'll go to my grave believing the 2015 Blue Jays should have gone to the World Series and could have beaten the New York Mets. I'll go to my grave believing that. The 16 team should have made a better look of itself in the championship series after beating Texas. Do you remember? Here's actually a piece of trivia, Griff, that I only recalled when I was doing some research a few days ago. Do you remember who started the clinching Game 5 for Cleveland? It was either Game 4 or Game 5. It was a kid we'd never heard of before and a kid we haven't really heard from since. But he beat the Blue Jays. It was Ryan Merritt.
Oh, okay.
Remember Ryan
Merritt? I would not have ever come up with that.
Yeah, Ryan Merritt. So, I mean, stuff happens to even, to teams that you even think are going to go deeper, but there's a disconnect here, Griff. And, there were a lot of warm and fuzzies. I'll just, I'm a uniform guy. We've talked about that on Exit Philosophy because I just always believe that sights and sounds and smells can take us back to places. When the Blue Jays changed their uniform back with some slight variation, but in the font and all that. But when they changed their uniform back before the 2012 season, I was like, man, the team that I cheered for as a kid is back. Because nobody else has that Blue Jays font that I know of.
Yeah.
And so I immediately felt reconnected. And, 12 was an underwhelming year, and there was the John Farrell stuff, and then there was the hope of 2013 after the Marlins and Mets trades, and that fell flat like a pancake. And 14 was a middling season where they teased us with a wonderful May and then regressed to the 500-ish team that they were. 15 and 16 were fun years, particularly 15. 17, 18, and 19, it was understood that a transition was needed. 20 was a surprise because they weren't a good enough team to make the playoffs in a 162-game season, but with an expanded postseason due to COVID and a 60-game regular season, they were good enough to get in that year. And then by 21, they're now legit contenders, missed by a game. That breaks our hearts, but there's next year because Vlad's a year older, Bo's a year older. 22, damn. 23, now it's like, man, I don't have that same feeling for this group. And I don't think it's got as much to do with a guy like Bo Bichette, who I have an immense amount of respect for, or Kevin Gausman, who I think is a wonderful pitcher, or Jordan Romano, who's a great hometown story. I can't warm up to the corporate-ishness of all of this. And if that's the way they're going and the way the rest of the world's going, well, fine. But a part of my soul checks out on this stuff. And I checked out emotionally. I kept watching. I had a job to do. You and I have a podcast, but I checked out on the vibe a while ago.
Well, we can wrap this up by just 4 words, and they're famous words in baseball. Wait until next year.
Wait until next year. And please give the Blue Jays the same rotation health this year as they had, or next year as they had this year, which isn't going to happen because it just, if it does, Griff, it would be abnormal.
Well, then you got the possibility of Alek Manoah coming back if he can get it together, and you got the possibility of Ricky Tiedemann stepping up. So there's reasons to believe. And we'll keep people informed, and every Monday on Exit Philosophy, the regular podcast, and I'm looking forward to having Ross Atkins explain what happened in this series, and that'll be sometime next week.
It will. So let's just do a little housekeeping here. First of all, thank you for watching. This is awesome. Griff and I want to do more of these, and we will next season. And it's not going to be a 162 game deal. God, it can't be for you. It certainly can't be for us, but we will hand select games, and I would say at least once a week, maybe a couple times a week. It'll depend on both of our schedules and what have you, but we'll want to do some live post games and just stay in touch with you more closely as the season goes on. So we're looking forward to doing that. Griff and I are going to continue to drop Exit Philosophy episodes each and every Monday, at least through the remainder of the playoffs. And the break isn't going to be like November to start of spring training. There may be a little bit of a December, January reprieve where we take a few weeks away, but we're going to keep the flow going with Exit Philosophy each and every Monday. There's that. Friday, tonight's Wednesday, Griff. Thank you for letting me know because I always forget what day of the week it is. Friday, we are going to do a complete recap of all 4 wild card playoff series. So we'll decompress, sleep on it a couple of times, talk a little more Blue Jays, maybe be in a little more of a reflective mindset at that point. We'll do Rangers, Rays, D-backs, Brewers, and Phillies, Marlins as well. So look for that on Friday, wherever you get your podcasts, and youtube.com/Exit Philosophy. If you haven't, please hit the subscribe button. Please give us a like, and please continue to feel free to comment on any of our podcast posts. And certainly we want your feedback on all of these live feeds too, as we're going to do more of them. So thanks for your commitment to us, and we look forward to continuing to be in touch with you.
Thanks, Scotty. Thanks, everyone.